Password based authentication system is very important in many applications. Usually we start our digital activity by logging into either a laptop or a mobile phone for accessing a social networking site or to check our email. In most of the applications that we use, we just give our user ID and password, and in the next step we start accessing system services or system resources. So it is important to see some security aspect in this classical password based authentication system. In this system, many users just select a password which is very simple and easy to guess. Anyone can guess that user's password. For example, they simply just select 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Since the password length that is enforced by the server is of minimum 8 characters, so most users simply select 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. If you are to do a survey, you would find that most users password is simply 1 2 3 4 5 6 or 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 or just some digit, same digit for all 8 characters or something like that, which is very easy to guess. Now there is this concept of the dark web, which is very rich in information and is managed by cyber criminals. Its database has lot of users' credentials. So cyber criminals can easily blackmail such users who go by a simple password. In 21st century, if you look at some powerful data breaches, you can see that even in an industry giant like Yahoo, millions of users' password were leaked. Similarly, even in some other industries like eBay, Adult Friend Finder and Adobe, some user accounts had been compromised. Now, how can we secure our accounts? Instead of 8 characters, if we select password which is 10 characters or 15 characters long, will that safeguard our account? It may or it may not. Ultimately, the password selection should be such that our password must have the minimum password length of 8 characters, and on top of this the password should have some other factors in it as well. If we rely on only length and select a password of 20 characters in a simple pattern such as 10 5s and 10 8s, then that will not be adequate to safeguard our account. One can guess that pattern easily. So along with the length, some other factors should also be considered to make our password good or strong enough so that others cannot guess it. Now the password length selected by different users varies from 8 to 30 characters, but as I said, along with the length, some other factors should also come into the picture. An important question here is that who is to be blamed for the password leakage or account compromise? If the end user is responsible for their account compromise or password leakage, then one way to address this is that we have to educate individuals that how their password should be selected or what factors should they keep in mind while creating a password. So awareness and education of the password selection are some factors which should be in place. The users should be made aware of that who is providing them that service or who is allowing them to create that account. If the service provider does not want to be blamed for this, then he should enforce a strong password policy for the service provided to the customers. When a user is selecting a password of his or her account, then a strong password selection policy must be enforced. Only then can the service provider avoid the blame for any account hacking or password leakage. If they do so, they can say that it is the user's fault or it is because of some other reason. Now let us see how that password based authentication system functions. It is very simple. When a new user registers in a system, he will basically create an account and he will provide a password for that account. The user password along with the user account ID is managed by the service provider. So the service provider will typically maintain one password file or one database where all the registered users account information, and along with that the digest of the password or encrypted password will be maintained. So the next time when the user will come to access that account, he will again give user account ID and password, and then that service provider will verify it by matching it with the stored user ID and password. If they match, then the user will be allowed to access the resource. So in this way user authentication is done and user authorization is provided by the server. Most attackers use a simple approach for guessing a user's password. For this, a common strategy is a dictionary attack. In a dictionary attack, You have a dictionary that is a public dictionary where all streams of strings can be accumulated by the attacker, and he can compute the digest of all strings and substrings of such words in the dictionary. Then the attacker will wait for live communication between the user and the server. When the user comes for a new login, then the attacker will intercept the encrypted password or digest password. He will check if that intercepted password or the encrypted password is matching with the stored password at his side. If it matches, then the attacker can find the string or substring which the user is using as a password. Once the password is known to the attacker, then he can blackmail the user, or he can log into a system on behalf of the user, and so on. In this way, the dictionary attack is very effective and efficient strategy by which an attacker adversary can try to guess a user's password. So, how can we get rid of that? How can we avoid this password guessing system? At a system level, the service provider can add one more parameter that is known as salt. So, most of the modern operating systems go with this additional parameter. In this, 2 character salt is used typically. In a salt of 2 characters, you have 12 bits if we consider ASCII characters of 12 bits. Now, by adding a salt for each user account and password, then the complexity of guessing that password will be increased by 2 raised to the power of 12. If 2 character ASCII value salt is used, then the complexity for a dictionary approach for each password will get increased by 2 to the power 12 times, and that is good enough to resist that password guessing pattern. One can use 3 character salt also to increase the complexity, but for each word in that dictionary, the complexity is increased by 2 raised to the power of 12 times, then the attacker may not have the computational resource by which it can store all the dictionary values digest, because one word would need 2 raised to the power 12 times of computational power. So, the attacker's storage for offline computation will be very expensive. In this way, by enabling this salt parameter in the conventional password based authentication system, the service provider can try to avoid a password guessing attack. Now, in the online space, a lot of open source or commercial version of password cracking tools are readily available. So, one can use that and try to crack a password or try to guess a password. If the cracker or the attacker is successful, then the password is compromised or the password is leaked, and after that the attacker can start blackmailing the user, or he can start accessing the system on behalf of the user, for which you can find a list of tools readily available in public knowledge, or you can also buy commercial tools for this. In earlier times, the password that we used were mostly very weak passwords, but today we are advised to keep a strong password because of the advanced password guessing or password modifying abilities available today. So, a very strong password must be selected by every user. It should be basically a mix of various characters like uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numerics, alphabets, and so on. And of course, it should have a minimum length of 8 characters. Usually, this is the definition of a strong password, but still sometimes it may not provide the intended security to our account. For example, even if you go by a mix of all these uppercase, lowercase, special characters, alphabets, numerics, and so on, but if your selection is biased or if it is very generic, then even a mix of all those parameters may still not give you a very strong password. A strong password must be a random password or a random string. Now, how can you select a random string? If you just type here and there without looking at what you are typing, then that will give you some sort of random notion of your password selection. But if you memorize something random to be your strong password, aiming that your password is a mix of all the above mentioned parameters, then your password may not be strong enough. A password should technically be random. So, while selecting a password, if you close your eyes and type random characters, it will become a random password. But then the next day when you will try to log into your account, then you may not be able to recall the password which you had selected. So, this is a big challenge here. Now, to overcome this challenge, you can find some helping hand. There are a lot of software which are available or some password managers which can give you the convenience of not needing to memorize anything. You can just use a software which will basically act as your password manager. So, when you are selecting a password with the help of this, it will follow the strong password definition and the random password definition as well. Here you are not memorizing anything, you are just hiring an assistant. Now, what if the assistant acts as an attacker? In that case, you will not have any control over it, because that assistant is controlled by some other party. Since it is a software which is controlled by and regulated by another party, so the other party will also get to know your password. So, when you are considering to use a password manager, instead of memorizing your password or instead of selecting your password on your own, you have to be very careful. Now, let us see one approach by which we can select a password which is very strong and random as well. When we want to memorize a sentence or a quote or something interesting, it is easy for us. In a password based authentication system, we need to remember or memorize our password, which is a word. So, instead of that, we can also remember a sentence or a quote. For example, let us take a sentence like, I like two colors, blue and pink. Now, we can remember this for a long time as our password. From this line, I like two colors, blue and pink, we can reach at a decent password. So, if we select the first symbol of each password of this sentence, then we get ILTC BAP, ILTC colon BAP, which is a very random string of characters. You will not find any such string or substring in a public directory which will give you any meaningful text. In other words, this string looks like a random string. Now, this is going to be our master password. Since we need to manage multiple applications in our life, it is always advisable to select different password for each application or every application more or less. You shouldn't go by one password to manage multiple applications, because in such a condition there is a greater risk of your accounts being compromised if you lose only one password or if someone cracks it. That is why the best practice is that for one application you must use one password. So, in that case, if you are using 10 applications, so we have to manage 10 different passwords for them, and each password must be strong. Now, we can do that easily if we have a master password like the one which we derived from that sentence, I like two colors, blue and pink. So, here we have this master password ILTC colon BAP, which is a very strong and random password. For this master password, we will be able to derive our password for other applications by adding some special symbol and that application's name to it. For example, suppose we are creating an account on a social networking site called test. So, our password could be something like ILTC colon BAP at test. Suppose our banking application is my bank. So, for the password can be something like ILTC colon BAP at my bank. In this way, the master password followed by that application's name or the application's name followed by the master password can be very strong and good combination for a password selection, as it will basically not give any string or substring which is available in public domain or public dictionary and which will not give any meaningful sense. So, by following this procedure, one can create a very strong password for multiple applications, and it will basically prevent or avoid password guessing kind of attacks, which are very powerful tools used by cyber criminals to collect information and use it to blackmail someone or misuse their accounts. In most password based authentication systems today, in addition to a password, you are required to give an OTP or your debit card number or your Aadhaar number, etc. In this way, they use multiple factors, including something you know, your password, and something you have like your ATM card or debit card number or your mobile number or something else that can be used as a second factor for authentication. Some systems may use your physical features like your biometric authentication, your fingerprint, your iris authentication, etc. as a single factor for authentication. In this way, password based authentication applications can go for multi-factor authentications, in which they require a password plus something that you have or your some detail of your personal information, and some other applications can go by biometric authentication. It varies from application to application, but in most commonly used applications, password plays an important role, and hence the password selection must follow a strong password notion. It means that your password must be random, and we can achieve that by following the process which we have seen in the above example. We can also use a password assistant or password manager tool, but we need to be very careful with that while using it. In the research domain of the password based authentication, you will find some recent advanced research which is related to negative password based authentication. In this, your actual password file will be managed by the server, and before that there will be another proxy server which will also manage all negative passwords. A negative password is basically a complement of all actual passwords. Now, here if the user is trying to access the system, then he will enter his password, and the proxy server which is managing the complement of all original passwords or negative passwords will not find any match. If there is no match, then that user request will be forwarded to the actual server which is managing that password table or password file. If any attacker is trying to log in on behalf of the user, then he will give any random password, or he will try to guess the password, and that guessed password may not be the actual password. If it is not the actual password, then it will find a match in the proxy password table. Since the proxy password table is having all the complement passwords of the original password, if the attacker's guessed password will find a match in the proxy server's password table, then the attacker's request will be caught. It will be detected that this request is made by someone who is not the actual user, and then that user will be disconnected. So, that request would be forwarded to the main password table. This is one recent research in password based authentication system. If you are interested in knowing more detail about it, you can look at some research papers which are also available in literature to understand how that negative password based authentication can block the attacker's attempt to get inside the system. To summarize this discussion, we can say that password based authentication is very effective in resisting an attacker's attempt for guessing the user's password. To have better security for our accounts, we should select a very strong password. It must be random password. It shouldn't be something which is available in public dictionary, or it must have random strings or random characters which must be a combination of uppercase, lowercase, special characters and numbers.